Welcome everybody to another edition of the .NET Foundation Project Spotlight. Today I'm super excited to have my guest Rob Mensching, who is one of the contributors to the WiX Toolset. Say hello, Rob, and introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Rob Mensching. I'm the benevolent dictator of the WiX Toolset by night. By day, I'm the CEO of FireGiant, which is a company that provides commercial services for the WiX Toolset. So I've been running the WiX Toolset since I created it in 1999, and now I run a company as well to grow it beyond just what it was at that tiny little project I started years and years and years ago.
That's great. So you have over 20 years of experience in the open source space as well as the .NET space. So that's super awesome. So for the folks who might not be aware of what Wix is, could you just give like a really high level intro of what Wix is and the value that it brings for .NET developers?
Sure. So the core premise of the Wix toolset is that we built installation packages. So we're very, very famous for the MSI outputs and things around the Windows installer that we've built for years and years. And the core focus is source code in your source control system, in your CI system, built the same way you build all of your other source code forever and ever with all the same kind of tools, text-based editors, Visual Studio integration, all that kind of stuff. And the output then, instead of an exe or a DLL, is an installation package that you can then send to your customers with all that other stuff you built in your CI system. So that's our unique claim to fame, is integrating into that seamlessly. And so we scale from really, really, really tiny projects all the way to super ginormous projects like Office. The very largest software projects will use the Wix toolset to build their installations. And then you can also get very, very small, all the way from one end to the other.
That's great. I thanks for the intro to that. One of the things that I immediately thought of is somebody who has built client or desktop apps. That technology has changed a lot over the last few years, and I'd like to know kind of your thoughts on what the mindset is when the concepts of publishing and packaging client applications, when they change. Like, what are your thoughts around that?
How long do you have? This is the space that we live in. So you're right. There's been lots and lots of different technologies. So I'll start with the Windows installer, just because it's kind of one of the oldest in the space. And the way that we think about the Windows installer at this point is it's kind of the anything installer. It's the industrial strength thing that can install anything. It has all of the expansion points that you might need to be able to get your software, however complicated it might be. Now, on the other end, you have lots of other choices for like line of business apps. You've heard, Click Once, which has an experience built into Visual Studio. And also Microsoft has come out with the MSIX, which is kind of in between. It doesn't have the extensibility that the Windows installer does, but it has a lot of other nice isolation that works very well for applications that fit in that space. The Wix toolset at FireGiant, we've actually done work to extend the Wix toolset so that you can use that same source code you might have used to build your MSI packages forever at whatever scale that you had. You can take that exact same source code and build MSIX packages. So it's the same thing as, hey, I've been building code for x86 forever, and now I want to build for ARM64. All you have to do is get the additional pieces to the compiler, and poof, same source code, different outputs targeting different installation packages. And then you can go from there. The spaces that we look at in server as well, and the kinds of things that we have ideas. I don't have anything right now to talk about, but we have lots of ideas that'll be coming in the future. But MSIs are used in a lot of cases to build and install software installation into the images that then get hosted up in the clouds. So it's kind of this, hey, I need to get my stuff packed, run it through the testing process, through the whole CI QA process, and then into that image that then gets put up into the world. We fit into all those kind of different nooks and crannies of developer experience for getting your installation package out the door.
That's great. I really appreciate that. I think one of the things that's also really interesting to me is obviously, we're going to this point now, especially as .NET 6 becomes more and more, closer to generally available. One of the things, obviously, is this concept of bringing .NET to all sorts of different clients, right? I'd like to know from your standpoint, like how can Wix help .NET developers kind of encapsulate that story across different platforms, or is it specifically, great stories on Windows, and for other targets, there might be some better options for you?
So today our history has been solely grounded in Windows. The project actually started as Microsoft's first open source project in '99, and we've been working our way up and up into all the different branches of Windows installation space. Um, we have designs on how to think about other platforms. Wix 4 has taken us a lot of effort, which is the thing that we're working on right now, and trying to bring ourselves from the .NET Framework world to the .NET Core world. The .NET, I don't know how you want to name that jump. We're trying to make that same jump that I think everybody else is doing in the tooling to switch our mindsets a little bit from the ways that we would build before to where we're in Wix 4 to adhere well to the kinds of things you would do in .NET 6, integrate well into Visual Studio 2020 that's coming out, integrate well into the new CI/CD systems that are popping up all over the place, GitHub Actions, Azure DevOps, all those things. The Wix toolset today is actually built into almost all of those platforms, so it's already there for you in those CID systems. But we want to make it so that you can bring your own on top of those CID systems. So the latest Wix, you don't have to wait for them to update their images. All of this in the .NET 6 timeframe is what we're shooting for. I think .NET, we're kind of catching the back end of .NET 5 and catching up to that, targeting .NET 6 to the end of the year with Wix 4. And then Wix 5, I'd love to come back and talk to you about what we think about going cross-platform even farther than just cross-installation technology. But right now, we're predominantly focused on Windows with many, many ideas for the future.
That's great. I like to get an understanding a little bit about the history of Wix, right? You said, you mentioned that you started in 1999, and that was a really, really long time ago, not just in the technology space, but in any space, right? What kind of motivated you to build a tool set that helped developers, publish and package and deploy these client-based applications that were so prevalent during that time?
So I was an intern at Microsoft in '98, and I was on the Windows installer team when it was being built. And I got called the unofficial tools team. So as the intern, you don't get to work, product code just in the engine itself, but hey, there's tons of tools around the outside. And so I got a real good appreciation for the things that developers needed to build installation packages. And that's kind of where I operated. After I graduated, I went back to Office and helped build the installations of Office, and basically lived inside one of the largest software projects in the world, figuring out how to build, ship, package that to billions of people, millions at least back then. And so when you get to that scale, you see problems that you don't necessarily see other places. And one of the biggest ones was source control and text file based. And I just had this fundamental idea that, hey, a compiler, linker, text files, this seems like a good idea. So I took a new thing back then called XML and said, I want to learn this. And I applied it to what I knew, which was installation packages with text files, and built a compiler in, believe it or not, VB script. So the original thing actually predates .NET. It wasn't until I transferred internally at Microsoft to a team that was adopting this new thing called the .NET Framework 1.0. Actually, I think it's 1.1 at that point. So I was like, hey, I need to learn this new technology. Can I port this side project to it? And they're like, sure. Why don't you take a couple weeks and learn C#, this new language? And so I took my VB script, sprawling, huge system, and converted it to C#. And so that was kind of my project at Microsoft. So, I got real data structures and learned all kinds of things. And then later on, extensibility, reflection through .NET Framework to do all kinds of things, all the basic stuff that are kind of quaint now when you think of .NET 2, all the way up to now where we're with NuGet packages and pulling your software together from lots of different sources and lots of open source projects. So all along that time, it was just a side project for me at Microsoft that I would let other people contribute to the code to. And I was trying to foster this idea of, a community around a block of source code, and the idea that you could grow something without having to have a single, management chain all the way across it, because it's just a side thing for me. And by the end of 2003, I said, hey, let's release this. I want to try to get to the outside world because Microsoft has started doing .NET and blogs and things like that, if you remember those days. And I found a set of people that are like, oh, that sounds like open source. I'm like, yeah, that's kind of what I'm trying to do. Got in the right set of people, and by April 2004, we released it as an open source project for Microsoft. And so it's been a wild ride since then. So we were at Microsoft then, we went to the Outer Curve Foundation, and then the Outer Curve Foundation projects migrated to the .NET Foundation, and now we're here in a fully structured system with board of directors and everything like that, which is great, and running and running and running with no end in sight at this point in time. So that's kind of the ancient history of from before .NET onto .NET, and now trying to get onto modern .NET.
That's great. One of the things that I think that's really impactful is that you mentioned that, it was Microsoft's first open source project, right? I think, one of the things that's great about open source projects is the ability for community contribution. So one of the things I'd like to hear from you is how does the community embrace and help give back to the Wix toolset?
So like all popular open source projects, we have no problem acquiring bugs from the community.
Sure.
It's a very large system, and people are happy to show up and say, hey, this doesn't work. And as frustrating as that can be sometimes, it's also very good to have the space getting covered with people that are volunteering and using it. It's like, that's great. We also have had probably 4 generations of contributors to the Wix toolset. People that started in my living room hanging out with me, that have gone on to like other companies or families and things like that. And then we had another generation start. And then when I left Microsoft, we had a lot of other people outside kind of joined us. And so like I have Bob, who's been working with me since 2002, still actively contributing to the Wix toolset. And then we have Sean, who has been working, oh gosh, I don't even know how long now, 5 years probably. Quite a while, doing fantastic work in there as well. So the 3 of us are kind of the core maintainers of it. And that 3, there's generally been 2 or 3 throughout the time of people that I've always leaned on someone else to bounce ideas off of, and ideally 2 other people, kind of to break ties, but just to get enough input into the project. So there's generally been 2 or 3 people at the top of the project making decisions. It's also big enough that no one person can hold it all in their head at one time. So having all the different perspectives has moved us along. And then we have a number of people, like shout out to Jacob, that shows us all our, we broadcast every other Thursday on Twitch, our meetings. We do triage, talk about the project. He's always there, giving his input from the outside. And, a number of other people that contribute around the outside as they have time to do it. But predominantly the project is driven by Bob, myself, and Sean, moving the project forward, and then lots of bugs from everybody out, and great cheerleader support, and some features every once in a while from people around too. So it's a very mature and very large project. So there's lots of spaces, but it's also a compiler that builds software installation packages. It's not necessarily a space that a lot of people have spent a lot of time in. So it's not the thing you just jump right in. Although we have some people who are trying, like, hey, I want to try to get in here. We're trying to get them into areas and finding easy bugs that they can work on and work their way down, as we have no end of work in sight.
Sure, I imagine as a very large open source project, there's always going to be people that want to contribute the old-fashioned way with bugs and potentially pull requests, right? You mentioned something that I find pretty interesting, right? Like, so it is in a space that might be, I don't want to call it niche, but it might be a bit, it might be interesting for people to join in that might not have a ton of domain knowledge, right? But from your perspective, what are some of the other ways that people, if they, they're users of Wix, what are some other ways that they can help contribute? Like, is the documentation process, is that open source as well?
Oh yeah, all of our documentation is available. It could always use work. I don't think it's ever been in a state where we're like, yeah, that's good. We could always use more contributions than that. And in Wix 4, we're actually doing a lot more work to centralize more of it. It was kind of spread out a couple places, which created some heartache for us. We're like, oh no, not that place. You have to put it over here because it ends up flowing through the system. That is really hard to see. especially with the move to GitHub and most people expecting to edit the exact page that they see in GitHub. We actually had a process where it published into a TUM file and with those kinds of things. And so they had to go find the other place. So we're improving that in Wix 4 so that people hopefully will see, if you see this page, this is the page you actually edit and set a pull request against, and it will get the fix in, which hopefully will remove that point of friction. The also, people that get in the WiX Toolset generally like, I need to do an installation. And the people that aren't there thinking, oh, I just need to get this done and get out. The people that stick around are like, there are some really neat problems in here in this whole space of declaratively stating what you want the future to look like, and then having the system take you from point A to point B, how you describe that. And then we have the problem also of not just, I want to describe this point in time where I want to put, these files here, these red keys here, these shortcuts here. You then have to think, and when I go future, I need to change that to this point. And then sometimes you have to think back in time, and in the past, it was back here, that it was this way. Now, how do I transition from that previous world to the new world? And then how do I get myself to the next world? And this declarative state transition, when you get into the space and sit around for a while, you feel like, wow, there's a lot of really fascinating problems that are more than just, I have to copy this bit from point A to point B, which is in the end, what I always try to remember everybody. What we're doing is we're moving this
Sure.
bit from one person's computer to another person's or many people's computers. So we'll get people that drop in for a while, and we try to get them interested in the declarative nature of it, because that's one of the things that we believe in, is the declarative nature, as opposed to writing, copy this file here. You state, I want this file here, and you let the engines move it there.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we have a whole compiler system it's modeled after, at this point, Wix 4, we've done a lot of work digging into compilers like Roslyn and LLVM, and taking the declarative compiler that we had, which is a little weird when you think about it. We're not writing procedural code or assembly instructions, we're writing declarative packaging, but we do it. We have to start with our language, go through the system, and then get to the end. And there's a little bit of procedural in the middle. When you work through all that, we've been looking at the compilers like LLVM, their front and back end, and kind of what they've done with their IL, their intermediate languages, as well as Roslyn, of course, digging into how they've worked, and improving the internal workings of the WiX toolset to make it so for anybody that's kind of halfway through the compilers, we have a very approachable compiler that's not so complicated spitting out assembly. Our outputs are very easy to see and tools that you can take apart, where I guess you have disassemblers, but that's always felt really low level to me. So as a compiler project, it's got a lot of interesting stuff in it too for people that want to do that. The cross-section of people that are interested in that declarative setup plus the compiler space, sometimes that's the hard part, to find people that are like, oh yeah, let me go play in that. But we've had success. I mean, like I said, I'm on the 4th generation of people that have joined, and then left for various reasons. Usually they got married.
Sure.
How a lot of the guys bailed on me, but now, we're rolling along doing great. And who knows what the next generation will look like. Although I hope Bob and Sean stick around for a long time, because we're working real well together.
That's great. So as we come to a close, I want, for what are your recommendations for, maybe for instance, I build desktop apps, I build client apps on Windows, and I'm curious to learn more about Wix. What are some of the resources that you would recommend people go and take a look at?
So we have the wixtoolset.org, which is our kind of landing page that has all the introductions and all the tools that you can get started there. And on there are then links to mailing lists. You can send mail to the mailing lists. We're doing experimentation with the GitHub discussions. Since those are relatively new, we'll see how well that works for us. But the mailing lists, you can go and drop in and ask questions. And so I think a lot of it's like getting in and playing on the website, just writing a little bit, because the nice thing is you can write a very little bit of XML code, run it through the compiler linker, get an installation package, and start seeing, hey, I could put this file on that, I could put this file on that, being able to move things. It's very easy to kind of get started into it. Then you can get really, really advanced on the other end. But getting started is fairly straightforward. And that's just kind of the way to go play. And then if you find it interesting, then jump on the mailing list if you want to kind of get more involved. But just using it, we have millions and millions of developers downloads that people are just using it. So chances are, if you've had a larger system, you've probably seen the WiX toolset floating around in your organization somewhere. It's out there a lot.
That's great. Yeah, and again, Rob, I want to thank you so much for hopping on Project Spotlight and talking a little bit about Wix and letting your passion shine through about being able to empower .NET developers to be able to be more effective. So I want to thank you again for your time. For folks that are interested to learn more about Wix, like Rob said, they're on GitHub. The Project Spotlight page will have links to all of the relevant materials. So for that, Rob, I want to thank you so much. Do you have any parting words?
Thank you, Isaac. Good time. Wix 4 is looking good, and we have a lot of cool stuff coming in the future. If you want to jump in, I know we sound like an old project, but there's so much work to do going forward.
I would like to say not an old project, you're a wise project because you've seen the entire evolution of what .NET has gone from, like you said, from 1.0, 1.1, and now you're talking about .NET 6. So it's
Yep.
great to hear. And, I think projects that have seen the entire .NET ecosystem all the way through, like there's definitely a lot of great stories to tell. So again, thank you so much.
Happy to be here, Isaac. Thank you.